Thank you for giving me this opportunity to introduce Dr. Marcel Bouffard. My first meeting with Marcel was at an adapted physical education conference in our home province of Quebec. It was in Three Rivers in 1979. I was 10 years old at the time. He was an outstanding teacher at that time and the head of the Department of Physical Education at Les Compagnons de Quartier Secondary School in Saint Foy, Quebec. During our conversation, I learned that he had completed his undergraduate degree at University of Laval and had completed his degree in motor learning at the master's level at the University of Montreal. We discussed the potential of him coming to the University of Alberta, and I was delighted when he applied, and he was very quickly accepted into our program as a doctoral student. I fondly remember the many seminars that we shared together and the systematic way that he prepared for them, as well as the thoughtful questions, often with a little bit of passion, and insightful observations that he made during our seminar. They were wonderful times together. It was very clear that Marcel was a scholar who would become a leader in his chosen field of adaptive physical education and adaptive physical. For his PhD dissertation, Marcel designed a groundbreaking study on the cognitive strategies children with intellectual challenges use when performing complex motor tasks. The care he took in the design of the study, the way he collected the data, and the sophisticated ways he analyzed the data signaled his ongoing commitment to the use of exemplary scientific procedures. On completion of his PhD in September 1987, Marcel was appointed an assistant professor at Lakehead University. Within 2 years, though, he was back at the U of A in the Department of Physical Education and Sport Studies. Not surprisingly, 2 years later, he was promoted to the rank of associate professor, and in 1995 became a full professor. By that time, he had published numerous refereed publications, and he had earned an international reputation. Many of his publications addressed the special challenges of conducting research in our field of adaptive physical education. His recent publications on evidence-based research with Greg Reed, a former colleague of mine at McGill, are an example of how he has continued to influence the research initiatives of people who are conducting work with children with special needs and those with disabilities. Marcel has also served on numerous master's and doctoral committees and supervised and co-supervised many graduate students. In addition to his work within the university, Marcel has also made a significant contribution nationally and internationally. He was a member of the planning committee of the Jasper Talk Symposium that led to the creation of the Active Living Alliance for Canadians with a Disability. And within the Alliance, he served for several years as the chair of the research committee. In 1996, Marcel served as the co-chair of the North American Federation of Adaptive Physical Activity Symposium, and in 2004, he served as the co-chair of the Federation Symposium on Inclusion that was actually held here at the University of Alberta. Marcel has made a significant contribution by serving as on a variety of editorial boards. In 1993, it's it's more than 20 years ago, he joined the editorial board of the Adaptive Physical Activity Quarterly Journal. And in 2007, he was named the associate editor. 3 years later, Marcel became the co-editor, and from 2011 to 2013, he provided distinguished leadership as the editor of that internationally recognized journal, the Adaptive Physical Activity Quarterly. Quite simply, throughout his exemplary career, he has provided outstanding teaching, research, and service to our field. I look forward, as I'm sure that you do too, to hearing his farewell lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Marcel Bouffard.
Can you hear me? I understand that my mic is functioning. Okay. Thanks, Ed, for these very kind words. And also I'd like to say thank you to Professor Mummery for initiating and facilitating this particular event here. I must say that this afternoon I'm in a particular environment I've never been before. That would be a good test for me. First, I'm partially blind due to the lights. Cannot see very well. As well, I have a tendency to be quasi-hyperactive when I lecture, and I'm told to stay behind the podium, so I'll have to fight some natural tendencies. But the part where I'm scared about is that I have to wear a portable mic, Just to tell you a story that happened, that's a real one. In 1994, I was teaching a skill acquisition and performance course in E120. And what happened on that day, there was a particular topic, and we had a person who was doing research exactly on this particular topic. So I said, bring the expert. So I asked this person to come, she agreed and all that, and essentially she did a lecture for about 60 minutes, and you must know that at that point in time she was really pregnant. Well, there's no difference between being pregnant and really pregnant, but she was really pregnant. She was about 8 months pregnant, my guesstimation, essentially. But also, on that day, she had a bad cold, the beginning of a cold, so she decided to use a portable mic. Okay? So after 60 minutes, she had to go. I thanked her, and she left the room. And then, I was doing a transition, and a minute later, strange sounds invaded the room. And quickly we noticed that these were sounds typically produced in a washroom. Okay? I lost total control of my class at that point in time. Bottom line, why I'm scared? I'm afraid of forgetting to turn off the mic. Okay, so please remind me because I can make that blunder. See, I embarrass myself. Okay, more seriously. Today, you've looked at the title of my presentation. Travel through time and reflection on life in academia. Well, I have a starting assumption. There were no time, there would be no change. Okay? So but there's been lots of change during my academic career. So what I want to do, I want to go over some of these changes as I've perceived them, essentially, and do what I've done pretty much every day during my academic life. Make comments, ask questions. Okay. So this is what is coming. I'm asked to talk at the farewell. I looked into the dictionary and I couldn't find a script about what a farewell is. So I don't know exactly what a farewell is. And I had to decide for myself what is a farewell, because nobody told me what is a farewell. So anyway, I define it as having 3 key components. One of them, it's an opportunity to say au revoir, as we say in French. I think it's the best way to say it. Oh, nice to see you later, those kind of things. It's also an opportunity to say thank you to the numerous people who have asked me. Okay? And it's also an opportunity to reflect on life, what has been accomplished, the challenge, and so on. But one thing I want to say before going forward is that I feel very, very, very fortunate. As Ted mentioned, I left high school teaching position to go and complete the doctoral studies. Okay? And furthermore, I obtained a tenure position at the University of Alberta. But about a year ago, I read about what happened to people, doctoral candidates, people who began the doctoral program in the United States. And what I found, I was really surprised. It was said that about only 50% of people who start a doctoral degree in the States complete it. Okay. Many of them are ABDs, okay, all but dissertation. Furthermore, of those who receive a doctoral degree, only about 50% end up having a tenure-track job. I didn't know how risky the business, say the adventure was at that point in time when I left high school, but I consider myself very fortunate from that standpoint because I ended up having a very good position at the University of Alberta. As well, now I can retire. Okay? University of Alberta has made it possible for me to have retirement. My dad never had the opportunity to retire. He died too early. Okay? And my mom was poor when it was time for retirement and all that. So essentially, retirement technically is something that has happened roughly over the last 2 generations. People were working up to their last day, up to, most of them, up to the time when they died, essentially. But most important thing as well, in regard to how I feel fortunate, is the large number of wonderful people I've been associated with and I have the opportunity to interact with. And I feel extremely fortunate because those interactions have really enriched my life. Now, just to give you an overall plan about where I want to go. Okay. I want to say I've divided my presentation into 6 major parts. One, I want to highlight some key events that occurred during my life. I think it's important, and I'll explain why I'm including that. As I want to also say a few thank you words to a number of people that have helped me. I cannot list everybody, but I wouldn't be here today if it was not of the help I've received from many people. And I want to highlight that. I also want to say a few words about teaching, research, and community services, the traditional function of university as they relate mainly to my own work. I also want to go into some of the challenges that are facing university from my perspective. And universities have changed significantly during my academic career, I would argue. And then I want to answer briefly, what do I plan to do? That's a traditional question that almost everybody asks me. What do you do after retirement? And then I want to leave some time for questions and comments. Okay. Now, part 1. I want to say some key events that happened during my life. Why am I doing that? I fundamentally believe that humans are processors of information. Remember my background is motor at the University of Montreal. And they process information presented to them via their interaction with the physical and social environment. Thinking doesn't occur in a void. My cultural heritage and a number of events have affected how I perceive the world and act. And I've decided to share some of them with you. Now, I just want to say a few words about my roots, where I'm coming from. I was born on a farm in a small town called Saint-Clair-Bellechasse, which is about 40 kilometers east of Quebec City. I was born and raised on that farm. And my mom and dad were raised during the Great Depression. My mom completed grade 3 because she had to leave school and take care of her mom. And my dad completed the elementary school. I was the 4th of a family of 8. And my dad died when I was 12 years of age. I started working on the farm when I was 5 years old. It was hard work, and I knew very early that I didn't want to be a farmer. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to be a farmer. Okay. We were poor, although we were never homeless. And as my sister told me a couple of summers ago during an informal discussion, we didn't know the meaning of the word leisure. It was work, work, work. But on the other hand, school was fun, interesting, and non-threatening. It was a great time for me in school. And we even had 3 recess a day, and therefore we could play. This is where my playtime was. It was not at home. Okay. But furthermore, on the farm, we were working from dawn to dusk. But when we could see the stars, I really enjoyed the time. I've always had a sense of awe, looking at the stars from the farm. You know, there was not that much light at that point in time, and it was possible to observe the sky with the naked eyes. I was fascinated by the Big Dipper. I was also fascinated by what I call the kite. Well, it's a part of Orion in terms of constellation. Anyway, I was interested in that. But one day, one person told me, this is where we come from. I didn't have a clue what that person was talking about, but I learned ultimately that this person was saying that we ultimately originate from stars and supernova, which produce basic chemical elements. Okay. I guess I'm somewhat of a materialist, philosophically speaking. Okay. But anyway, I've always been interested by our history and what I call our ultimate origin. Now, for me, I think, as I said, it's time to say thank you to a number of people. I cannot list everybody, but I think that there are some key people that have affected my thinking and have been very influential, and I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to these people. Without them, I wouldn't be who I am. First one, I've never met Albert Einstein. Okay? Why? Well, he changed our understanding of the universe. You've all seen the equation E equal mc squared. There's a relationship between energy and mass and all that. You know, he made those kind of connections. He changed our understanding of length, mass, and even time, and all that. It's due to Albert Einstein. And furthermore, he refused to abandon determinism. He often said in his life that God doesn't play dice when he was talking about quantum mechanics and the probabilistic interpretation of quantum mechanics. He had difficulty philosophically to say that the data fit a different philosophical framework. Okay? He maintained his essentially view about determinism. He was a pacifist as well, you know. He admired Mahatma Gandhi, and but at the same time he wrote to President Roosevelt to support the Manhattan Project. There's some ambiguity here that he played. Why did he write to President Roosevelt while at the same time essentially was a pacifist? There seems to be an incoherence here. But at the same time, I wish I'd had the opportunity to talk to him. And my guess is that he felt that he had to select between bad choice, as we sometimes have to do in life. And not select the perfect choice and all that. But the part that I would have liked to talk about with him is the story about him. He said, when I was an adolescent, I asked what would happen if I was sitting on a beam of light. You know, what would it be to sit on a beam of light that travels at 200,000 kilometers per hour? Imagine you can ask such a question. But the point here is that that's an example of creativity. Asking questions, getting out of the box to ask some question. And creativity is at the heart of science. You know, we can do lots of things, but thinking differently is what oftentimes moves us forward. Two other persons I have to say thank you. And again, I didn't meet them. But starting in the 1960s, there was in Quebec what was called the Quiet Revolution. Okay. Jean Lesage and Paul Gérin-Lajoie altered what happened in Quebec. He did many things. I want to emphasize the educational aspect. Quebecers up to the 1960s were relatively uneducated compared to the national average. But they changed the educational structure of Quebec. And it is due to their dream and their leadership that they shifted advanced education from the elite to the mass, and they made it possible for the mass to have access to advanced education. Okay? And I would not have made it, and then they made change. So I'm thankful to those people. I also spent some time in the CEGEP, and at that point in time, you know, for me, what has always been difficult is going to study a particular topic. I had interest in the natural science, the social science, the health science, the humanities, and I didn't really know where to go. At the CEGEP level, you could select a stream of specialization at that point in time. I didn't know which way to go. So my decision was to take the stream that would open as many doors as possible to go to university. That was my decision. I ended up graduating in the natural science at the CEGEP level, essentially. But at that point in time, I studied university programs, and I discovered, oh, there's something we call physical education, and it's fun. Well, we can study anatomy, physiology, biomechanics, psychology, philosophy, something related to education, all as it relates to physical activity and movement. That was a perfect match for me. Couldn't constrain my thinking to a few things, but we were borrowing from other fields and applying to sport and physical activity. Plus, there were a few packed courses, physical activity course. So, anyway, I like that. I applied to physical education at Laval, and essentially, that's what happened. Okay, sorry, I forgot to switch slides. Got excited. Okay, the text was related to that slide. Okay. Now, what you see is the front view of, I saw on a regular basis when I was an undergrad student in physical education at Laval University, the Pavillon d'Éducation Physique et Sport. Essentially, this is front view of this part, the PEPS. And when I arrived at Laval in 1970, I was amazed at the amount of optimism and excitement that our professor had about the future. Couldn't figure out why. It took me 2 months to discover, oh, they had read Alvin Toffler, The Future Shock, the Shock to Future. And Toffler made a prediction about what would happen. And one of his was that on average we'd work about 25 hours a week. Was he wrong? Okay? But if we work 25 hours a week, there will be lots of leisure time and lots of time available for professionals like us that could offer physical activity, physical education, sport type of services. But it was wrong. It was wrong, possibly for two reasons. One, Toffler could not anticipate the advent of all the technology, you know, that would, like the portable phone, the personal computer, the World Wide Web. None of that was above the horizon at that point in time. And furthermore, another thing that I think he forgot to include an important human factor, people want money. Anyway, it's hard, the lesson, it's hard to predict the future, but at the same time we have to keep trying predicting the future because we have to prepare for the future. One person, one of my teachers that influenced me the most, he was a tough and demanding guy, I tell you. You have to be prepared when you talk to him. It was Marcel Bouffard. And he had an amazing body of knowledge, especially in relation to the biological science. In my mind, he was a walking encyclopedia in regard to the biological domain. He was absolutely amazing. One thing that he taught me at that point, he was saying, never said that this way, but he said, I want us as professionals to provide good evidence for what we're doing. Stated differently, he was talking about evidence-based practice without having that language at that point in time. But he wanted our action to be supported by research, essentially. So he taught me that, essentially. And another element that really he taught me, when I look at this research program, toward the end of my undergrad degree, he became interested in genetics and physical activity. And then started doing some studies on irritability, and then he did studies on monozygotic twins, on different phenotypes like maximum oxygen consumption, percentage of body fat, and numerous phenotypes and all that. And essentially what he found very often in most studies that if you look at the impact of a training program, well, people of the pair simply gain the same similar benefit, but people of different pair get different benefits. So you have what we call reactors and non-reactors, essentially. So via study, justify the study of inter-individual difference in response to treatment. And he did lots of work like that to document that essentially there's lots of difference. There's not only an average effect of a treatment, but there's also individual difference in response to treatment that we also have to address. Okay? So he did that. Nowadays, he pushes inquiry in such a way that he can somewhat predict who will respond or not respond to a particular intervention. This is where we are right now. So what I'm talking about here is that it's almost a plea to say, okay, we can use Fisherian design and all that, as we've done very often, to see the average effect of a treatment, and they have their advantage. But at the same time, I think one of the challenges of the future is to figure out why people react differently to treatment. Okay, and Claude Bouffard has moved in that direction. Okay, and now some other people outside beyond Claude Bouffard have done that. But I think that's a big lesson. And this idea of being able to adapt intervention to people's characteristic context and so on is an important idea. Another person that influenced me is Thermo Simard. He arrived at Laval just for my last year of the undergrad program. And he taught me the adaptive physical activity course. And formerly, the year before, it would have been more of a therapeutic exercise course. And he's the founder of the president and founder of the International Federation of Adaptive Physical Activity. Essentially, I work with him on an informal basis, but he's one of the persons that guided me toward adaptive physical activity. I also went to the University of Montreal, and as Ted mentioned, I obtained a master's degree in motor learning from University of Montreal. I went there being interested in the question of memory, ended up doing a master's degree on motor control, the use of proprioceptive feedback to control movement and all of that. But at the end of the day, I went there, traveled there, but it was not something that I felt was enticing, because what was studied via those traditions was essentially what I call the constrained learner. But what happened when you have a learner that is relatively unconstrained? What do people do when left to their own device? So I was more interested in metacognition and self-regulation, which I studied during my doctoral studies. Then I moved to University of Alberta, and the first person I met here when I arrived was Dr. Jerry Glassford, I should say. Jerry has always been a kind and a caring person that I could trust. At that time when I arrived, he was the director of grad studies, and he also became the dean. And he's the dean, in fact, that technically hired me and offered me a 10-year track job. But one thing I've admired about Jerry is that he's always been able to listen to people, but at the end of the day, he knew that he had to make decisions. But he was able to justify the decision on the basis of vision and value. He was able to explain why he was taking certain direction. And with him, I learned to associate transparency with trust. Key person in my life has been my advisor, Ted Wall. You saw him a few minutes ago. He said we met in Three Rivers. A conviction I have, and I've always been absolutely convinced of that. For my doctoral studies, I work with the best person available in the world and the best place to do my PhD in relation to what I wanted to do. He fried my brain on a regular basis. I got out of our interaction absolutely drained. Okay? But I learned that unrestricted questioning is what gives inquiry its energy and vibrancy. Okay? He nurtured my curiosity and sent me to the right person or the right place. He also showed me the importance of theoretical work. Chaos in the brickyard is not something that he would accept. Okay? And he had some very fundamental beliefs that have affected me. He said, essentially, that you need breadth for depth. And It's always been a challenge to maintain some breadth, to obtain some depth. Okay? And there's nothing better than a good theory. Another person was in educational psychology, Tom McGuire. Tom McGuire was a psychometrician, and I took 4 grad courses with him. 1 intermediate statistics, 2 measurement, and 1 exploratory factor analysis, although EFA exploratory factor analysis could be viewed as a measurement course in psychometrics. It could teach this concept as clearly as anyone else I could imagine. But the part that struck with me, it's when he got out of the technology and started asking a fundamental question. What's the meaning of the numbers? He constantly came back to that. We've done all of that, what does that mean? Okay? So that was a very fundamental question. When talking about factor analysis, he asked, what are factors? What the heck have we done when we say we have found some factors? Do factors exist or are they convenient fiction? It was in the instrumentalist realist debate, essentially. Okay? And he's also done some work on statistical analysis, and he's asked, what's the meaning of residual? You know, you've maybe been taught about partial correlation and analysis of covariance, but fundamentally you're working with residual. What is a residual? What kind of a meaning do we have there? So, what I'm saying here is that oftentimes qualitative researchers say that they are dealing with meaning, but he taught me that quantitative research also deal with issues of meaning of the numbers. Okay? And it was a profound influence on me. Another person is Ann Hall. I never had the course with her, but our presence would be felt. Okay. And I think she really enlarged my horizon because she got me of what we call my dogmatic slumber by our talk about feminism and qualitative inquiry at that point in time. And she was a very thorough person and could produce very sound and solid argumentation. Okay. And she's continued her work after her retirement. Another person that helped me, particularly here, you know, we organized the North American Federation of Adaptive Physical Activity Conference, okay? And Centenary 2008 event. A key person that helped me in the background was Pat Bates. She was extremely careful and very thorough. And one characteristic that she has, I don't have, she can think about all the details. She can spin scenarios. What if this? What is that? I'm not good at that. I know I'm glad I was surrounded by a person like Pat. Another person that helped me when I was Associate Dean Research is Lan Chan Marcos. She is our research facilitator, and in my opinion, the idea of a research facilitator is one of the best inventions of this university. Lan made my life as Associate Dean Research much easier. She is a thorough, meticulous, hardworking, and highly knowledgeable person who has a great sense of humor. She's an asset for our faculty. Another person that helped me is Leanne Baudistel. She was my administrative assistant when I was Associate Dean Research. She was also my administrative assistant when I was Associate Editor and Editor of APAC for about 7 years. What I can say about her, she had a constant desire to help, and she frequently went beyond the call of duty, helping me in numerous others. And one thing I've noticed about Leanne, she smiles all the time. Therefore, I infer that she's happy all the time. This is contrary to me, where I feel that I'm often grumpy. Oh yeah. Anyway, thank you to all of those people. I haven't listed everybody. There are a number of people that wanted to highlight the contribution and the influence they've had on my life. Now a few words about teaching, research, and community services. I taught a large number of courses. I remember 12 at University of Alberta and many others at Lake Ed, and when I was a sessional lecturer between 83 and 85. And some people have disclosed that I became a kind of a fixture for PEDS 580, Nature, Scientific Inquiry, Physical Education, Sports Studies. Well, the name has changed a bit over time, or the number and, in that course. But one thing I will say about that, my teaching has changed over time. Students may not have perceived that, but my teaching has changed. Initially, I was a technocrat. I was doing knowledge transmission, purely speaking. Okay. And then I started asking myself, why was I taught that? Why do people think this particular way? And initially, I believed that people are rational and they use epistemic argument to justify the way they work. Okay. But during the 1990s, I discovered the importance of assumption and tried to figure out what they are. What kind of things do people take for granted when they conduct an inquiry? Okay. And I work a bit on assumption, but I discovered that it's not the full story. When it comes to knowledge generation, issues of power are related to the production of knowledge. Okay? And people acquire some dominant belief, but we are not totally epistemically rational. Okay? There's more force, there's some power issue that are related to that. So, in my course over time, I took more and more what I would call a socio-historical perspective. I'm not a historian, I'm not a sociologist, but I would describe my approach as being more socio-historical, essentially to show the evolution of ideas. If you can show the evolution of ideas, then I think you can create some degree of mental flexibility to show that ideas are not fixed, they are changing over time, and there are different ways of thinking about problems. So, anyway, that's the kind of change that has occurred in my teaching. Okay. Okay. Now, to talk about some of the change, I would argue that the framing of academic matters nowadays is driven quite often by market and economic values, which are often in conflict with traditional educational goals, educational values. The goal oftentimes is viewed as to increase the economic worth of the labor market. And the basic belief is that students should be economically productive. Okay. We use more and more what I would call a marketplace jargon in our interaction with each other. We talk about consumers and clients instead of students. We talk about service providers instead of faculty. It's a kind of a market type of thinking that's going down. That's going there. And furthermore, there is frequent evaluation of our work using performance indicator. And we are asked to produce evidence that we're doing work. You know, there's a lot of performance evaluation that's going on. Now, we are going also through a period of extremely utilitarian period. Some market force still the direction of university. And government policies favor certain academic endeavors, like applied science and technology, business, some selected profession, mission-oriented research. But lower priority is given to basic science, social science, humanities, and arts. In relation to our faculty, I worry about the implication of those trends. You know, one of the beauty that I've always liked about our faculty is its multidisciplinary nature. Okay. Now you see the force are going in one direction. Will it imply the exclusion of some areas of inquiry or work? I'm uncertain about what will happen there. Okay. But these are trends that I find worrisome. Okay, some comments about education. Okay. There's been more and more debate between preparing for a job versus liberal education. Okay. We've seen that. And as far as I'm concerned, of course we train for a job, but we do more than simply training for jobs. Okay. Essentially, when we're talking about education, training for a job is not the only thing we do. Education also must equip people with the skills that they need to adapt in whatever way is necessary as their lives change, job evolve, and new opportunities arise. Okay. One of the beautiful things about our faculty is that we are uniquely located to offer a broad view of the world considering our multidisciplinary nature. In terms of vision of education, I'm still a person who values learning for its own sake. Learning could be fun, learning can, whatever it is, could be personally enriching. Okay. And one of the aims of education is to foster freedom through understanding and critical thinking. I think in education we should emphasize self-directed learning Claude Bouffard became a walking encyclopedia, but a lot of what he learned by himself, by reading manuscript and all of that. So self-directed learning is still central to me. In education, we should learn to ask difficult questions. And the difficult question is not what can be done, but what ought to be done, as far as I'm concerned. They are on the edge. They are ethical questions very often. And at the same time, when we ask difficult questions, we have to provide fair criticism of the authority. We have to understand and question some of the basic assumptions we're making. We need to be empathetic with the marginalized and the different. And fundamentally, to do that, I think that knowledge of this sort of idea is quite helpful. Now, a few comments about some of the things that have made me have really enriched my life and found I've been very proud of. Each year, when we're talking about we receive information about our student athletes, most of the time, essentially, our student athletes, full-time, we have a number of full-time students that have an average above 80%. Okay? We have the largest number of student athletes that are essentially receiving some of the best marks. So my point about them is that I love broad-based education. I love well-prepared citizens that could do things broadly. And that's a reflection of that way, and I really love that. As well, I've been fortunate to work with the Physical Education and Recreation Graduate Student Society over the last 6-7 years in my role as Associate Dean Research, and then the role continued. But I really like the kind of thinking that PERG has fostered in this faculty, and I think it's extremely positive. They've asked very penetrating and important questions, and I want to thank PERGs, and I encourage you to continue in that direction. Now, some comments about selected publication. This one was my first publication, the result of my master's degree, and I learned that about 5 years ago, Dave Collins, one of my colleagues, published a manuscript with the same topic. The user probably set the feedback in the control movement. The question remained the same, but the answer got hopefully better. Okay. It's contrary to, I learned that from one of my colleagues, that talked about an exam that had been given to third-year sociology student. But the third-year sociology student found the exam the year before, and then they complained that the answer to the question changed from year to year. And the teacher was like, why? He said, well, the question remained the same, answer changed. Okay, here, this one is a result of the work I've done with Ted during my doctoral work. And essentially, the idea was to create a theory of motor development. It was not to produce a literature review about motor development, what was known, but it was to go one step beyond, not only know what had been said, what had been done, but to produce a theoretical framework that could account for motor development. I started my doctoral degree, and my advisor said, well, let's go in that direction. I said, okay, fine. But little did I know that this was really done at the doctoral level. But anyway, it was my kind of forced introduction to theoretical work in adaptive physical activity, all that, as a researcher. And at that point in time, as a component of the work we were doing, we were using Norman and Chalice's model, which was a kind of a dual processing model that became very popular in social psychology. Now, I spend also some time trying to figure out how people think, as I said, trying to understand how people think. I need that when I'm teaching. Anyway, it's been a central focus of my life, and there are some selected publications here in regard to that. Okay. In 1993, I published what I would consider to be possibly my best paper, or my most important, although people didn't necessarily listen. But it was the peril of averaging data in adaptive physical activity. And what happened in this paper, it's a kind of a follow-up to the work of Claude Bouffard on individual response to treatment. The difference in individual response to treatment here. And this paper questioned the traditional Fisherian model to conduct research. With the Fisherian model, you're oftentimes concerned with the average effect of a positive treatment. Nothing wrong with that, but the research story should not stop there. That's what we were saying. Furthermore, in adaptive physical activity, we've always talked about individualized educational plan, individualized program, and those. Anyway, adaptive physical activity is driven by a philosophy of individuality. And if people react differently, we cannot generalize from aggregate to people. We need to push our science to go beyond the aggregate to be able to adapt services. We're talking now about personalized medicine and all that. Well, that's the same kind of idea we're talking about. As well, there's some danger in using strictly a Fisherian approach to the conduct of inquiry. Oftentimes, causes are acting at a personal level. Well, if you tap my patella, it's my knee who is going to extend. It's not your knee. But point is that the mechanisms are at a personal level. Okay. Or, you know, there's a number of other phenomena that have explanation at the personal level. Anyway, I'm attempting to fit the theoretical thinking with the philosophy that is guiding the field. Okay. I would argue that this paper possibly had limited impact in kinesiology in general. But at the same time, outside, if you go outside of kinesiology or physical education, physical activity, there's now a lot of writing, and people, you know, you go into read about genetics, epigenetics, and all of that. Well, people are interested by those questions, individual response to treatment, and all that. I want to go back and do some work on that later on. Here, this one is a surprise to me because this is my most frequently cited paper. The basic idea was that, well, you know, it dealt with what we call at that point in time children with movement difficulty. They became labeled person with developmental coordination disorder later on. And one of the key questions that was asked at that point in time, the thinking was quite often, well, maybe those people have some characteristic. Let's figure out if there's some difference in the nervous system that could account. Those kind of questions were asked. But those questions were saying the source of the difference could be something intrinsic to the person. But we said, oh, maybe those people don't practice as much as well. Anyway, we received support for this idea, you know, that those people in a non-constrained situation, unconstrained situation, practice less. But if you put them in constrained situation, or like regular physical education, they alter tasks. Okay? So they don't practice the task as expected and all that. Anyway, which could impair learning. This has been my most frequently cited paper. From my standpoint, it was a very simple study to do, although it required hard work to find participants. But it was a very simple study. It was a good master thesis, as far as I'm concerned, but it became the most frequently cited paper. My point is that I don't understand my work. Anyway. Another one was with Peter Crocker. When I was at Lake Ed, Peter Crocker was there, and I did some work. He was interested in coping, so we ended up doing that. And the surprise to me is that in 1993, I received a phone call around February telling me that I was had been selected to receive the Research Award Writing Award from the American Alliance for Health, Physical Education and Recreation. Oh, well, I thought it was a joke. Honestly, I thought it was a joke because from my standpoint, this paper had a number of, well, it was okay, but there was a number of fundamental questions behind the paper. Furthermore, what we end up publishing was not as good as what we submitted. The reviewers could not figure out. No, I'm serious. No. People could not understand that we were making a methodological point about the relationship, the correlation you can observe between variables. And it's known in any measurement book that, well, the reliability of your score affects the maximum correlation you can find between scores. So we estimated the reliability. Okay? And I said, no, it's unlikely that this is the hypothesis. But at the end of the day, we end up deleting the section. Okay. It's surprising. The editor was a measurement guy. Anyway, there's something escaping. And furthermore, there are some other aspects, you know. it was based on, on generalizability theory and kind of analysis of variance and all that. And, well, you know, we were breaking down the variance into components and all that. But if you have people that are homogeneous, well, they'll look very similar. If people are heterogeneous, you'll have a large variance component. If the situation are homogeneous, small variance component. If the situation are quite different, you'll have a large variance component. And furthermore, you can have a person by treatment interaction variance component. Anyway, to make a long story short, there was lots of problem in the paper. And you receive a research writing award. I never understood that. Anyway. I also, oh sorry, again that was your text. Okay. I also did some work on the measurement of bioelectrical impedance using a measurement theory, what they call a measurement theory in psychometrics. It's called generalizability theory, and again the idea was to break down, trying to figure out what source could affect the score that you get when you're trying to get information about bioelectrical impedance. It was there. We got some understanding about the factors, but what is missing from my standpoint is that we haven't figured out why those factors influence the score. We haven't answered the why question, but our team had to be dismantled before we could address those kind of questions. And furthermore, personally, I have concern about generalizability theory. To me, it's a prediction theory. It's not a measurement theory, but I know I'm going into a different territory. Okay. As well, we did some stuff on questioning our research assumption. Okay. And did that. But what I learned at that point in time is that people don't like that when you question their basic starting point. So some people provided a response, and I felt that, no, there was a complete misunderstanding of what we were doing. People were creating a straw man of what we were saying, so it led me to produce a few rebuttals to the interpretation that those people made and all of that. Anyway, so when you engage and you question, my point is that I always felt that academics were quite open to ideas, but when you push a bit their fundamental work and what they do on a regular basis, whoops, you may expect some reaction. And it could become virulent. But I decided to go there. And some of my more recent work, as mentioned by Ted, has been on evidence-based practice. And, you know, when it comes to that, I would say, well, it's a great idea, it looks. Who can be against the use of evidence to guide practice? It's a well-selected term. And I remember when Greg Reed asked me to work with him on the creation of evidence-based practice guidelines in adaptive physical activity, my first question to him was, what is evidence? What do you mean by that? He said, well, that's why I want you to be with me. Okay, so fundamentally his goal was to create a kind of hierarchy of evidence, but my goal was trying to figure out what the heck's going on there, what does that mean? Okay, so I started reading that, and I'll share with you very quickly three kinds of understanding of the word evidence, and hopefully you'll see why I think that is room for questioning that. To say that there is no evidence to support practice simply meaning that there is no evidence, work hasn't been done. In that case, what should we do? Well, some people would say we don't support the practice, but anyway, by eliminating the practice, we may in fact eliminate good practice. So be careful about that one. Another one that's become the dominant one is essentially a view, is essentially a view that science could be is a function of the method you use. It's a narrow conceptualization of science. But what those people have argued is that we can rank methods in terms of their quality. Okay? And we can rank them in terms of their quality. And some of them are like, you get a hierarchy of evidence there. You don't have time to go much over that. But the point is that you rank the quality of research according to the method. And then you use that to support or not support a particular type of intervention. Now, this viewpoint has accepted a strong empiricist viewpoint about inquiry. Stated differently, when you read that, oftentimes, according to these particular type of thinking, the question of why do things happen is pretty much pushed away. And I maintain that in science we have to ask not only what happens, but why or how. Okay, and those fundamental questions have been put a bit on the side by that movement. Again, there are different understandings of evidence-based practice, but I'm talking about some generalities here. Okay. Now, another thing in terms of evidence I would point is that, you can get evidence, but we may ask, how much evidence do you need for action? Well, if you listen to what people say, they will often say the evidence are inconclusive. Okay? The research, they say oftentimes the research is not sound and all that. Well, be careful. You may remember the tobacco industry in the 1960s. There were some epidemiological studies at that point in time that were completed, and they say, oh, there's that association, but we don't know why there could be a link between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. Okay? The same thing is that happening pretty much in terms of climate change. The point is that sometimes the notion of evidence is mixed up with some goal of political view. Okay? And when this happens, the strategy is to manufacture doubt in society. And all that. I'll stop here. That's Oscar one. Now, I take what I told it. I still have some work in progress, but I'll skip that. The key point, I still intend to do some work after leaving University of Alberta. Now, spend some minutes on some challenge facing the university. Oops, sorry. Okay, some service to the community. Well, I organized the North American Federation of Adaptive Physical Activity Conference and all that. The idea was to force the field to think about what was taken for granted. Adaptive physical activity is a multidisciplinary field, so we have people speaking different languages, and the idea is to foster communication across those different people. I spent a fair amount of time on thesis committee and consultation. I was on numerous scholarship committee. If there's one word I would like to say in regard to our students applying for scholarship, is that they have to be able to talk or to write for both the generalist and the specialist at the same time. And I've seen that many people have difficulty there. I spent some time as associate dean research, and it was a great experience, and I learned a lot about the culture of the university. I've been associate editor and the editor of the Adaptive Physical Activity Quarterly. This took a huge amount of time, but at the end of the day, I did the work my way, and I'm comfortable with the way I did the work. It took time, but I'm comfortable with what has been accomplished. Okay, some challenge facing the university. Well, as I said before, there's a perceived need for more money. That's one thing. Everybody is so obvious that anyway, much more time is spent in fundraising. We're looking for more and more for products that we could sell. Outside of our faculty, the talks of patents are often there. And I claim that we are now in a situation when we have goals and values that are in conflict, okay, due to the demand of the university. Okay, and there's a conflict between various stakeholders and traditional values of inquiry. The challenge here, I think, would be to find a balance between our academic mission and our revenue-generating idea. Without money, the university would go bankrupt. But at the same time, strict emphasis on revenue generation, make it a business. We have to find a balance, and personally I'm inclined to say we should stick to our basic fundamental values. Another change that does occur is more demands for interdisciplinary inquiry. There are different buzzwords associated with interdisciplinary inquiry. Some distinction to be made. I'm not going to do that. But the basic idea is that to solve problems, we need to address them from multiple perspectives, from multiple disciplines. And that's an idea that became more and more dominant over the last 20 years. In terms of research support, if you go back to the 1970s, I would say that the researchers were pretty much able to decide what kind of inquiry to pursue. and the funding was allocated on the basis of per-se scholarly value. That was what we call the blue sky research type of approach. But starting roughly in the 1990s, there was some priority funding. Priority funding emerged. And there was an alliance between government and major granting agency to prioritize certain kind of research, certain areas of research. We observe a switch from basic to applied research. Okay. And more recently, we'd argue that priority funding has been given more and more to areas that have a positive economic impact. That's one of the trend. And I personally worry about those trends. You know, do we have to accept that? I think no. And if we accept that, what kind of economic impact do we have? Is it suicidal to go in that direction? Anyway, those kind of things. Another thing that I want to highlight, and that one you may not have heard, but I want to argue that nowadays there's more and more of a debate about who knows. We often in academia have assumed that what we do allows us to possibly generate knowledge, and some people would say the truth, between quotation marks. What we have observed, I would argue, over the last 10 years, is that this viewpoint is now questioned by politicians. Okay? Just to give you an example, the public housing project, for some politicians, has been viewed as a magnet for crime. The war on poverty has led to welfare dependency, according to these people. The environmental regulation have destroyed the competitiveness of industries. The educational reform has produced children who are unable to read and write. Okay. The parental authority view has led to so the development of rude and disrespectful people. We are at a time when there's a debate about who knows, and contrary to the assumption that knowledge translation can occur from research, I think the challenge is greater than simply knowledge translation. We cannot assume that the politician will accept that our knowledge could be translated. So politicians question our ability to know. Okay, funding decline and priority funding. Okay. Here, just some statistics for our Tri-Council here. You can see that over a period of about 8 years, CIHR funding remained pretty much the same, but you can see a drop in funding for NSERC and SHRC. But the point I want to highlight with this partial slide is that SHRC received roughly 25% of the funding for NSERC and CIHR. So the poor parent is the social science. Do social scientists need as much money to the other one? I don't know, but there seems to be a big difference in terms of amount of funding. Another one is being that over time, target funding has received more and more money, and unfettered funding declined. That's a slide that represents an example from NSERC, essentially. So more and more target funding. And as well, you know, there is been a focus more and more from basic to applied research. And some people have asked, can applied research thrive when basic research is struggling? I think that's a question we need to ask. I'll make an example, a very simple example. We are asked to produce technology, okay, that can have an economic impact. Well, I'll give you an example of what I think. The World Wide Web, on the slide, if you remember what I presented, I said the World Wide Web started in 1989. This is partly true, but partly false, essentially. The World Wide Web emerged because there were some scientists, nuclear physicists working in Geneva at the CERN, that had huge amount of data. Huge amount of data, and they said, we cannot analyze that at any place in the world. So the idea was to split the data and send it to different research centers. To do that, they had to invent a kind of a mini web and a mini internet. So they send the data around. And then the idea came, oh, let's make it World Wide Web. Well, to do those communications became possible due to the fact that we had satellite and optic cable. But more important, a few years before, there was some electronics. And the development of electronics and transistor
occurred in the 1950s. But development in electronics and transistor were due to development in quantum mechanics in the 1920s. My point is that, yeah, we may be asked to produce application, but it takes time, often time to produce application, assuming we want to produce application. You see what I mean? So are we giving a false image of the nature of inquiry by accepting this idea that we're going to turn the crank quickly around? All right, I'm opening the question here. So also want to say some comments about Merton norms. In 1942, he wrote a paper about what are some of the norms of academia. He talked about communalism, universalism, disinterestedness, originality, and skepticism. Just want to say a few words about communalism and disinterestedness. Communalism simply means that scientific knowledge is public knowledge freely available to all. It's been a norm. The results of research do not belong to individual scientists, but to the world at large. And disinterestedness means that scientists are unbiased. I know it's hard to be unbiased. You know, objectivity has been questioned, but that's the idea that science aim at being as unbiased as they can. And science is conducted in order to further human knowledge. I would say those norms are questioned. You all know that some scientists cannot freely talk about their research. And if you go to a certain source of the federal government, if you read in the Federal Government Media Protocol, which I have the text of that, the Library and Archives Canada Code of Conduct, Value and Ethics, and the Department of Fisheries and Ocean Canada, you can find text that restrain the scientists. Scientists are not allowed to talk to journalists or their research without the research the talk being approved. So, in my view, it's questioning communalism and disinterestedness. That's a trend. But all of those examples are from the federal government. And I assume, well, maybe university is immune to that. But about 6 months ago, I discovered that maybe it's in our own house. In 2005, there was a financial agreement signed between Imperial Oil and University of Alberta. And I received the text from the Canadian Association of University Teachers, the text from the writing is open for business or what. And it says the following. The agreement between the University of Alberta and the Alberta Energy Research Institute indicate that the Alberta Minister of Advanced Education must be notified of any breakthrough discovery. The minister must be consulted regarding the desirability of and content of the public announcement and press release, and that the university will refrain from making any public announcement without the approval of the minister as to the content of the announcement or press release. So, depending on what you define as our house, if it is the faculty, it's outside of our house, but I see my house as being University of Alberta, it's inside of our house. You see that? It's been there. Document very hard to find. Okay? Okay. Now, I want to say we are in the context. You know, we had severe cut in March about 2013. We discovered that. And Tom Lukasiuk was replaced, and he was replaced by Dave Hancock, who is now our premier. And when he became the Advanced Education Minister, he said he wants to see Alberta post-secondary education to work on innovation and commercialization. The pressure, the wind is blowing in that direction. No problem with having financial resources for the university, but universities are not business. Okay? And I wonder why, to a certain extent, business has failed and we're asked to replace business. Anyway, I wonder if it's the responsibility of university to alleviate the economic shortcoming of private business. Now, this leads me to a question. Again, I forgot to answer the slide. Are we living in a culture of conformity? And I found a little blurb by Paula Simon in the Edmonton Journal in August. And she was commenting about the lack of reaction, okay, of the University Board of Governors and our senior administrator. And she said, why is there being silence? Why didn't they take a public stand? They may have done things in the background, but publicly, I haven't seen, I'm like Paula Simon. Okay? And to quote her, she said, mindful perhaps of the Alberta Health Service Board fate, university governors and senior administrators aren't publicly defending their independence. This may be the most troubling part of this whole affair. A sign our political culture of conformity has become so ingrained that people have lost the courage to fight back. I think we should think about our comments. I could imagine that there were some reasons for our administration to behave that way, but I don't know what they are. I'm leaving you with a troubling question. I don't have an answer to this one. Still, to summarize, I still think that we need to stay true to our mission. Fundamental mission of university are research and teaching, and some community services. Okay? That's one thing, that's a given. Okay? But at the same time, I look at our site, University of Alberta site again this morning, and it is described that University of Alberta is a $348 billion engine. The argument here was, it was a response to the argument by Lucasiak and these people that university didn't contribute enough to the economy. 3 months later, we got that study that showed that our alumni produced more money than the budget of the government of Alberta. Okay? And maybe that was a good answer, but where I have reservation about that is that this answer seemed to frame issues strictly an economic issue. As I said, we need money for sure, but universities do more than simply contribute to the economy. It's part of the concept. So essentially, the danger here for me is that to put that there is to accept that issues have to be framed in terms of economic issues, and I think we do more, and we have to show how we could frame the issue ourselves. This is where public education about university appears to become essential. But it cannot occur if we're silent. Now, I'm almost near the end. Okay, I know I'm way longer than expected. Brief look at the future. Well, people ask me, what do I do? What will I do? Okay, well, I will be like Ted Wall, like Jerry Glassford, like Han Hall, like Claude Bouchard, and many people before. I'm leaving University of Alberta, but I want to maintain contact with University of Alberta. I'm an academic, and I still have interest. You can say we can still get interested by ideas and all that. And I still have some document to write, but I want to read and write. But read broadly, not always feeling constrained that you have to read in relation to your job, and writing. So some publication, I want them to come. Another 1 hour a day to take care of myself. Do more exercise. I think I've been good from a cardiovascular standpoint, but I need to do better when I have to, in terms of balance and flexibility, and more particularly, I have to start to use weight to develop strength, muscular resistance, and muscular endurance and all that. So, but I think you can put that in 1 hour a day. I think it's a good one. No, I think it could be an interesting motto. 1 hour a day to take care of myself. That's all it takes. Okay. More golf, well, but I have a sore back, so not more than 3 times a week. Travel, it's certainly something I want to do, and I'm told by everybody, do it in the near future, don't do it when you get too old. I'll follow this advice. And I want to spend more time with my family and my grandson. Now, what you see is a photo of my grandson, who is now 9.5 months old. When he was 7 years old, he took his, 7 months old, he took his first driving lesson. Point behind the slide is that Maxime, to have a good life, will need to learn a number of skills and acquire lots of knowledge. but he must have the environment that will allow him to do so, to have a good life. And this is why I have this particular slide here. What you see on the left side, okay, is what has been called the pale blue dot photo. It's a photo taken by Voyager 1 in 1990 when it was at the edge of the solar system. And the pale blue dot is the Earth. It's our home planet. It's our home house. And we have to do our very best to protect it. Otherwise, Maxime and the future generation may not have a good house. And we have to keep working on that. Thanks for coming. And I'll stop here. Would have much more to say, possibly.